The Marriage of Figaro by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. It's hard to know where to begin with an opera that, for many, is the supreme achievement of the greatest musical genius ever to set pen to manuscript paper. How to assess an opera whose basis is a play credited with heralding the French Revolution and the end of the old order. How to deal with a work of theatre in which the social interplay among a galaxy of star roles delights the senses, while simultaneously confusing the mind with all the complexities of its plot. Maybe we can bring some order to all this by seeing the opera as a set of intersecting triangles. The number 3 certainly plays an intriguing and recurring role in the opera's genesis. The play, on which it is based, is one of 3 by the extraordinary writer and adventurer we'll call, for the moment, Beaumarchais. The libretto, or book, as we'd say in musical theatre nowadays, is by a no less remarkable adventurer, Lorenzo da Ponte. And the score is by Mozart, in many ways the wild man of Viennese music in the 1790s. The French play, Le Mariage de Figaro, is the second in a sequence of 3 works by the watchmaker-turned-playwright, businessman-turned-government spy, Pierre-Auguste Caron. Through an advantageous marriage, he was also a tradesman-turned-gentleman by the addition of the aristocratic suffix de Beaumarchais. The 3 plays are The Barber of Seville, The Marriage of Figaro, and, least well known, The Guilty Mother, La Mère Coupable. The rule of 3 also applies to the position of The Marriage of Figaro in Mozart's amazing career, because it is one of 3 operas Mozart wrote to libretti by Lorenzo da Ponte. These 3 operas together represent one of the great pinnacles of operatic achievement, and are Le Nozze di Figaro, The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Così fan tutte. The Marriage of Figaro was produced in 1786, just 3 years before the social world it helps to define was swept away in the French Revolution of 1789. It was followed the next year by Don Giovanni, and the trio was completed by Così fan tutte in 1790. These 3 masterworks are widely contrasted in character, and we'll return to that point later. But of the 3, The Marriage of Figaro is the most revolutionary in several ways. Why revolutionary? One of the problems of presenting opera in the 21st century, when the art form has become so achingly respectable, is to create some of the sense of shock with which now popular operas were originally greeted. Paris audiences in 1875 were appalled by the brutality and realism of Carmen, not to mention the fact that the very attractive heroine was a member of a despised underrace of gypsies. Verdi created similar havoc by making a heroine out of a prostitute in La Traviata. Mozart's Marriage of Figaro delivered a similar revolutionary surprise. First, the play had been banned by the Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II for its revolutionary sentiment, depicting a servant as smarter than his master, portraying a nobleman as a scoundrel and lowlife, and allowing the servant Figaro to attack the old order and get away with it. The libretto for the opera cuts out some of the revolutionary rhetoric of the play and tones down much of the rest of it. But the situations and the underlying anti-establishment tone remain intact, and da Ponte adds an artistic revolution of his own, with a libretto which, in its complexity, Its depth of characterization and its flouting of operatic convention reaches a peak of literary sophistication never to be surpassed in the succeeding 200 years of operatic creation. And Mozart. If a whole generation of music lovers has had its perception of the boy genius, the gutter snipe who was the voice of God, shaped, some might say distorted, by Peter Schaffer's play Amadeus, then so be it. But few writers have better captured the phenomenon that was Mozart than Peter Schaffer. Just recall that scene when Mozart is explaining his revolutionary use of ensemble, starting modestly, then adding voices to create the magnificent architectural achievement that is the Act II finale of The Marriage of Figaro. I tell you, I want to write a finale lasting half an hour. A quartet becoming a quintet, becoming a sextet. On, wider and wider, all sounds multiplying and rising together, and then, together, making a sound entirely new. I bet you that's how God hears the world. Millions of sounds ascending at once and mixing in his ear to become an unending music, unimaginable to us. Schaffer captures there the essence of Mozart, and of that quality which sets him at the very top of the pantheon of composers. It is something that we might call the spirituality of the human condition. This isn't meant in a religious sense. There is no evidence that Mozart was any more conventionally religious than he had to be, but refers rather to his uncanny ability to see behind our follies and vanities, to the stuff that lies too deep for tears. It is almost as if he could take music to a place undiscovered by words and conventional expression. Or to put it another way, Mozart, more than any other composer, with the possible exception of Bach, could recognize a spark of the divine in us and express it in music. You will hear that quality at its most tender in the Countess's forgiveness of her husband at the end of The Marriage of Figaro. But it was there throughout Mozart's short life, and something which particularly sets him above even Bach and Beethoven is that his genius is expressed in the widest possible range of musical forms. Uniquely, and I use that overworked word in its literal sense, alone among composers, Mozart excelled in every possible medium available to the composer, and in every one revealed that spark of something higher, something nobler, that spark of the divine. You hear it, of course, in his marvellous church music, whether jubilant, as here in the glittering coronation mass, or deeply solemn, as here in the inexpressibly beautiful Ave Verum Corpus. And that same spark of the divine is present through an immense range of what we might call secular music. His astonishing piano concertos, for instance, over 20 of them. That was a passage from number 23. Mozart's extraordinary spirit shines through in concertos for all sorts of instruments, including the oft-abused bassoon and the recently invented clarinet. But nowhere is that essence of Mozart, so very hard to put into words, better expressed than in his operas. It is almost as if earlier musical titans like Bach had seen the role of their art as the glorification of the creator, while Mozart, a child of the age of reason, saw the role of his as the glorification of the human condition. The difference is wonderfully caught in Karl Barth's famous saying, "Whether the angels play only Bach in praising God, I am not quite sure. I am sure, however, that en famille they play Mozart." The trio of operas we have been discussing comes late in Mozart's short life, after a long apprenticeship as an opera composer that would result in his taking the art form from relatively simple, formalized beginnings through to a level of dramatic and musical sophistication hitherto undreamt of. You can in fact hear that progression happening before your very ears. To start with, the early, deeply serious operas on achingly noble and aristocratic themes, Lucio Silla, for instance. Or here, Ascanio in Alba, written when he was about 14. By the time of the abduction from the Seraglio, more a play with music than a grand opera, he had developed a distinctive voice and a deeply moving quality that would remain with him. This extract expresses the longing of Belmonte for his beloved. In addition to the beauty of the vocal writing, listen to how touchingly the orchestra depicts the ardent beating of the young man's heart.
Klopf mein liebevolles Herz, klopf mein liebevolles Herz, klopf mein liebevolles Herz. Und es wiedersehens
And that ability to turn your heart over with a graceful phrase remained with him throughout his life, as exemplified here in another tenor aria, this from his last great operatic success, The Magic Flute, written only months before his famously early death.
Wie stark ist nicht ein Zauberton, weil holde Flöte durch dein Spielen, selbst willet ihre Freude fühlen.
The three operas of Da Ponte and Mozart may be chronologically linked, but they could not be more different in character. While Figaro is domestic in scale, a comedy but with deep political and social overtones, Don Giovanni is a darker work still. The crashing chords of D minor that open the overture and herald the arrival of the stone guest to supper, once heard never forgotten, are the very stuff of tragic menace. Even in the supposedly comic numbers there are dark overtones. When the servant, Leporello, tells the recently deflowered Donna Elvira that she was not the first, nor will she be the last, of Don Giovanni's conquests, he drives home the point with maximum cruelty, telling her that in Spain alone the Don's conquests number 1,003. 1003.
Adamina. Il catalogo è questo, delle belle che amo al padron mio, un catalogo egli è che ho fatt'io. Osservate, leggete con me, osservate, leggete con me. In Italia 640, in Lamagna 231, 100 in Francia e Turchia 91, ma in Spagna son già 1.300. 1.300.
All life, you might say, is to be found in Don Giovanni. While Don Giovanni's seduction of Zerlina may be simply carnal, the music is not. It is sublimely tender, as if Mozart is saying that all any of us ever wants, even the most heartless seducer, is some tender love and care. But lest we be carried away by the tender side of Mozart, let's remember that he was also a sensualist, in life and in art. The urgings of Don Giovanni, as he coaxes Zerlina, and her attempts at resistance, are full of sexual menace. Overwhelming power is maybe not a phrase you generally associate with Mozart's writing style, but it is present in Don Giovanni in such numbers as Donna Anna's great aria Orsai chi l'onore, when she realizes that the smooth-tongued aristocrat she has been addressing is in reality her father's killer. And still greater power is manifest at the end of Act 1, when Don Giovanni confronts his accusers and faces them off in a scene of immense drama. Così fan tutte, the last of the three Mozart da Ponte operas, is the most delicately drawn, the most poignant. It has been variously characterized as a mere social anecdote and as one of the most profound statements in theatre on the nature of human love. Listen as young Ferrando tenderly sings of his beloved. Listen also as the two ladies and the old bachelor philosopher Don Alfonso bid farewell to the ship that is carrying the ladies' young officers off across the Bay of Naples, allegedly to war. But for all its tenderness, there is great power in Così fan tutte. Here is part of Fiordeligi's very long aria in which he expresses outrage that the two interlopers, really the women's fiancés in disguise, should presume to enter such a house of virtue. The sentiment is not dissimilar to that of Donna Anna a few moments ago. But here the situation is as deeply and affectionately comic as the other was tragic. Given the woman's state of grief and shock, how can we say that? We don't. Mozart does. As Fiordiligi pours out her scorn and rage, listen to the orchestra bustling and occasionally chuckling away beneath, as if to say, "Methinks the lady doth protest too much." Later, in Act 2, when the whole fiancé-swapping farce has turned deadly serious, we have the lyrical young Ferrando we heard a moment ago, deeply wounded, maybe emotionally scarred for life, pouring out his grief at what he sees as Dorabella's betrayal.
Tradito, schernito, dal perfido cor, dal perfido cor. Io sento che ancora quest'alma l'adora, io sento per essa le voci da
All these qualities, tenderness, power of expression, comedy and suffering, will be present to a high degree in Mozart's depiction of a hectic day in the life of the inhabitants of the castle of the Almavivas. Before we plunge into the action of The Marriage of Figaro, we should take a moment to look at all three Beaumarchais plays, and keep in mind that the action of Figaro is the middle tale of this trilogy. The first of the Beaumarchais plays is The Barber of Seville, which tells the story of how the ardent young Count Almaviva succeeds in wooing the lovely young Rosina, abetted by the resourceful town barber Figaro. Next comes The Marriage of Figaro, set a mere 4 years later. By now, the Count has developed a wandering eye. The Countess, as Rosina became at the end of The Barber of Seville, is now the neglected wife. Figaro has wedding plans of his own, but the Count is seriously attracted to Figaro's bride, Susanna. Betrayal and infidelity have soured the love affair so touchingly depicted in the earlier play. The last of the Beaumarchais trilogy, La Mère Coupable, The Guilty Mother, will take the story in still more disastrous directions. The French Revolution has taken its toll on aristocratic privileges. The old castle of the Almavivas has been sold, and the Countess has had a baby by the page Cherubino. The only legitimate child of Almaviva and Rosina has been killed in a duel, and the noble family is in financial decline, and is being exploited by an embezzler. It is only the wit and skill of Figaro and his Susanna, now senior servants of the Count, that saves them. The dramatic chronology having been clearly established, we can confuse everything again with the operatic chronology. Although the plot of The Barber of Seville comes before that of The Marriage of Figaro, the best-known Barber of Seville, by Rossini, was written after Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. I say best-known because there may be as many as 17 Barbers of Seville in operatic history. At least one of them, that by Paisiello, was greatly in vogue when Rossini presumptuously produced his version in 1816. Incidentally, the disastrous first night of Rossini's Barber has assumed legendary proportions in operatic history. It is thought that jealous fans of Paisiello may have plotted to wreck the premiere. If so, history had the last word by sweeping Paisiello's Barber all but off the stage and into the dustbin of history. So although the operatic chronology is the reverse of the dramatic one, it is irresistible to compare the way the two composers, Rossini and Mozart, depict their principal characters. Here is the lovely, buoyant 14-year-old Rosina in Rossini's Barber of Seville. Mozart has her as an embittered 18-year-old matron. Rossini's Barber is a quicksilver figure. Mozart's Figaro has become a grudging, occasionally truculent valet to the Count. Count Almaviva is an ardent wooer in Rossini's opera. In Mozart's, he has become a jealous, vengeful autocrat. Just a reminder that by the end of The Barber of Seville, Figaro and Almaviva have teamed up and outwitted old Dr. Bartolo and his housekeeper Marcellina, and Almaviva and Rosina are united in married bliss. "4 years have passed, and Figaro himself is engaged to Susanna, lady's maid to the Countess, as Rosina must now be called. The Count, as we shall call Almaviva from now on, has tired of his wife, and any liberal sentiments he may once have possessed have deserted him. He has abolished the ancient droit de seigneur, known in Latin as the jus primae noctis. Whatever the language, the notion that the lord of the manor has the right to sleep first with any bride on her wedding night is disreputable. The Count now regrets the abolition and would like to repeal it, and Susanna is the object of his desire. So a potentially explosive situation is created before the rise of the curtain. Boss lusting after employee's fiancée, who is maid to the boss's wife. We also need to know that Figaro has borrowed money from Marcellina and pledged that if he cannot repay it, he will marry her. Dr. Bartolo, still smarting from tricks played on him 4 years previously, will be a willing ally in any plan to embarrass Figaro. As the curtain rises, Figaro and Susanna are making plans for their wedding. He is measuring the floor. 5, 10, you'll hear him sing, 5, 10, as he arranges the placement of the marriage bed. While behind him, Susanna is trying on her wedding bonnet. Listen to how Figaro's matter-of-fact tones contrast with the lighter, lyrical Susanna. Musical characterization at its best. But Mozart sends out an interesting signal here. By the end of the duet, Figaro is literally singing Susanna's tune. It's as if Mozart was saying, "We know who'll wear the trousers in this marriage." I suppose the idea of the woman being smarter than the man, nowadays the stuff of situation comedy, was fairly revolutionary in its day. So when Figaro remarks on how handy it is having a room so close to the Count's on one side, and to the Countess's on the other, Susanna disabuses him, saying that the Count's choice of location is just a little too convenient. Figaro has a scene to himself, which is one of those moments when you can hear the distant sound of the tumbrils that would soon carry aristocrats to the guillotine. "So that's your game," says Figaro in a recitative, a type of singing that is more like dialogue, as opposed to arias, which are sung poetry. Recitative is usually the means by which the action is carried forward in an opera, while the arias are used to comment on the action and express emotion. There is recitativo secco, which means dry recitative, usually accompanied by harpsichord. The grander sort is recitativo strumentato. recitative accompanied by full orchestra. We'll meet both in this opera. Here the continuo, that's the accompaniment to the dry recitative, is given to the combination of cello and harpsichord. The effect is extraordinary, as Figaro snarls his defiance of the Count's seduction plans.
Bravo, signor padrone! Ora incomincio a capire il mistero e a veder schietto tutto il vostro progetto.
Next, as is usual, comes an aria, in which the singer comments on the situation. Se vuol ballare. If you want to dance, boss, go ahead, but I'll play the tune. The phrase Figaro actually uses in referring to his boss is the disparaging Signor Contino, hard to translate, but literally meaning Little Mr. Count. And listen to how the orchestra mimics the guitar to which the Count will dance.
Se vuol ballare, signor Contino, se vuol ballare, signor Contino, il chitarrino le suonerò, il chitarrino le suonerò, sì, le suonerò, sì, le suonerò.
Dr. Bartolo and Marcellina, the defeated duo from the previous play, now enter, and Bartolo blusters in that great operatic set-piece, the Vengeance aria. He will be avenged on Figaro for helping to steal Rosina from him, and he will do this by enforcing a loan agreement between Figaro and Marcellina. The full forces of the orchestra, including timpani and trumpets, are mustered to depict Bartolo's righteous wrath. Though the exaggerated leaps of the voice and melodramatic scoops in the orchestra are Mozart's way of mocking the old man.
La vendetta, oh la vendetta, el piacer serbato ai saggi, el piacer serbato ai saggi.
Yes, taking vengeance is one of life's pleasures. As the pompous old fellow tells how he'll use every trick in the legal code and armoury to defeat Figaro, we are reminded of his former bluster, which is such a comic feature of the Barber of Seville.
Se tutto codice dove si volgere, se tutto l'indice dove si leggere, con l'equivoco, con un sinonimo, qualche garbollo si troverà. Se tutto codice dove si volgere, se tutto l'indice dove si leggere, con l'equivoco, con un sinonimo, qualche garbollo si troverà. Qualche garbollo si troverà, si troverà.
The aria ends with the splendid and marvellously ambiguous phrase, Tutta Sevilla conosce Bartolo. All Seville knows Dr. Bartolo. And Bartolo vows that that scoundrel Figaro will be defeated. Interestingly, all the scores and libretti have Bartolo sing Vinto sarà, will be defeated, but this recording amusingly substitutes Vostro sarà, will be yours. As Bartolo promises Figaro in marriage to Marcellina, surely the ultimate defeat and degradation for Figaro.
Tutta Siviglia conosce Bartolo, il birbo Figaro, vostro sarà. Tutta Siviglia conosce Bartolo, il birbo Figaro, vostro sarà il birbo Figaro, vostro sarà il birbo Figaro, vostro sarà, vostro sarà, vostro sarà, vostro sarà.
We'll pass over a short scene when Susanna encounters her supposed rival Marcellina for a spot of competitive bitching, in order to meet another wonderful character. This is the love-struck young nobleman known as Cherubino, because he looks like a little cherub. But though he may look like a cherub, he has mature tastes and ambitions. He is in love with the Countess, which, given the nature of the Count, is a dangerous thing to be. Yet you feel perhaps he is more in love than with any one woman. Listen to how brilliantly Mozart captures the ardent, breathless quality of an adolescent who doesn't know whether he is on fire or encased in ice, why the sight of every woman fills him with desire, but also with apprehension.
Ogni donna cangiar di colore, ogni donna mi fa palpitar, ogni donna mi fa palpitar, ogni donna mi fa palpitar. Sono i nomi d'amor di letto, mi si turba, mi sai trepetta, a parlare mi sforza d'amore.
This most engaging young man, sung as you will have heard by a mezzo-soprano, tells us how he thinks only of love, talks of it all the time to the flowers, the grass, the winds and the water. In the touching coda to the aria, he sings, "And if no one is listening, well, I just talk of love to myself." Massive complications now ensue. Cherubino hides as the Count enters to make a date with Susanna. Then the Count hides as Don Basilio, the music teacher, enters to tell Susanna the gossip about Cherubino and the Countess. At one point, both the Count and Cherubino are hiding on or behind the same chair. The Count reveals himself. Susanna intercedes on Cherubino's behalf, but the Count then discovers Cherubino. The bottom line, so to speak, of this great act is that Cherubino must now be sent away to war to keep him out of mischief. Figaro will send him off with a wonderful and justly famous aria, Non più andrai.
Non più andrai, farfallone amoroso, notte e giorno d'intorno girando, nelle belle turbando e riposo, narcisetto arancino d'amor. Nelle belle turbando e riposo, narcisetto arancino d'amor.
This is not only the most popular aria in the opera, but it is brilliant music theatre. After the myriad complications of the first act, which we have only sketched here, comes an aria with a march rhythm and simple melodic line. Its affectionate mockery of the young boy courtier, soon to be sent to rough it in army life, is a superb antidote to an act whose tensions have often seemed almost unbearable. This is a showstopper that was cheered at its first ever dress rehearsal over 200 years ago and has been cheered somewhere on the planet every night since.
Non più andrai, farfallone amoroso, notte e giorno d'intorno girando, nelle belle turbando e riposo, narcisetto arancino d'amor. Nelle belle turbando e riposo, narcisetto arancino d'amor. Cherubino alla vittoria, alla gloria militare, alla gloria militare, alla gloria militare, alla gloria militare.
Everything changes now. The scene changes to the Countess's bedroom. The mood changes from madcap gaiety to deep sorrow. The tone changes from fado farce-like complexity to simple grief. As I mentioned, only 4 years have passed since that ecstatic first love of the young Count Almaviva for his Rosina, but already the bloom is gone. Porgi amor. God of love, give me back the love I had, or else let me die. Mozart matches the sentiment with a deeply moving, plangent melody. The staggering complexities of plot that will haunt us through the fourth and final act are set in motion here at the start of Act 2. Figaro enters and explains to Susanna and the Countess his plan for the Count to be promised a date with Susanna that evening in the garden, but substituting Cherubino, who now comes in for the bride-to-be. The boy, who has obviously not obeyed the Count's instructions to clear out, now sings an aria even more famous than his breathless song in Act 1. But the theme is the same. You ladies know what love is, but I don't. It's also new to me. Again, the orchestra provides a delicate guitar-like accompaniment. In the more palpitating middle section, Cherubino returns to the thought, is it a delight or a torment?
Sospiro cielo, senza volar, palpito e tremo, senza saper. Non trovo pace notte né te, amor mi piace, non nervoso.
Then the big tune returns. The plot, therefore, calls for Cherubino to be dressed as a girl, and we have that sexually disorientating theatrical device of a woman playing a boy's part, trouser role is the usual description, disguising him or herself as a girl. Susanna has the most words in this opera, and some say the most words of any role in any opera. She is hardly ever off stage. She now has an aria in which she dresses Cherubino in girl's clothes and teaches him to walk in the right way and play-act as a girl. Here's just a fragment of that charming interlude. The atmosphere of innocent fun is dispelled with the arrival of the Count. The terror of the Countess is palpable. She cannot be found with Cherubino in her bedroom. Anonymous letters, army commissions, mistaken identities, and lovers in the closet make the time from now to the great Act II finale one of the most complex yet satisfying in opera. In this short extract, the Count does not believe his wife's story that it is Susanna who is locked in the closet. In truth, it is Cherubino who is hidden from the Count's wrath. Soon we shall see the Count baited, with Susanna substituted for Cherubino, thereby making a fool of the Count. But first, a sense of the menace in the scene, as the untrusting Count calls on Cherubino to come out. The Countess bids Cherubino be silent, and Susanna, who has entered from the wings, senses the mortal danger.
Susanna, via sortite! Sortite così va!
Fermatevi, salite! Sortite, no! Sortite, no!
E chi pietà rosa? Chi?
Non vieta, non vieta! Dove sta un'amica da sposa? Provando ella si sta,
Chiarissima è la cosa, la voce qui sarà. Chiarissima è la cosa, la voce qui sarà. Chiarissima è la cosa,
se lo posa,
la voce qui sarà. Qui sarà. Chiarissima è la cosa, chiarissima è la cosa, la voce qui sarà.
The immensely long Act II finale is one of the great architectonic creations of opera. All the good characters enter into and escape from mortal danger, and all the bad characters are thwarted. And just when we think good has triumphed, in come Marcellina and Bartolo to enforce the loan agreement, and the act ends in total but harmonious uproar. Early in Act III, the Count has a great scene which is one of the wonders of the bass baritone repertoire. The grand plan that is afoot, and of which the Count is unaware, is for Susanna to make a date with the Count, and then for Susanna and the Countess to swap dresses, so that the Count will make a pass at his own wife. He has a recitative and aria, but there is nothing traditional about them in this very revolutionary piece. I mentioned earlier recitativo strumentato, the recitative with orchestral accompaniment. Never has the device been used to better effect. Overhearing Susanna tell Figaro that all is well for them, the Count savagely repeats her words and suspects a conspiracy. Quite rightly. Listen for the fury of the orchestral accompaniment to the recitative, 1,000,000 miles removed from the tinkling of a baroque harpsichord.
Hai già vinta la causa. Cosa sento? In qual loccio cadea? Perfidi, io voglio di tal modo punirvi. A piacer mio la sentenza sarà.
The aria that follows is as violent and emotionally storm-tossed as anything that will follow from Verdi and Wagner in the century ahead. The Count savagely demands whether he is to forego his pleasure, presumably Susanna, just so his servant can triumph. The fast and furious middle section tells of his determination to show Figaro who's the master.
A no lasciarti in pace, dopo questo contento. Oh, non nascesti audace, tu non nascesti audace, per dare a me tormento, e forse ancor per ridere di mia infelicità.
The Count concludes this great aria, surely one of opera's most overpowering, with a statement that only vengeance will satisfy him. E jubilar mi fa, and make me rejoice.
Già la speranza sola delle vendette mie, quest'anima consola, e jubilar mi fa, e jubilar mi fa, e
Plot and counterplot. It is revealed to general hilarity that Figaro is the illegitimate child of, guess who, Bartolo and Marcellina. So that's the lone-stroke marriage issue solved. Well, not quite, because as Figaro is embracing his newly restored mother, Marcellina, Susanna enters and catches them at it. This all occurs in a sextet of dazzling virtuosity, and we'll pick it up at the point where former foe, Marcellina, tells Susanna that she is the mother, and Bartolo the father, of her groom. There are incredulous exchanges of sua madre, his mother, And suo padre, his father, as the Count looks on, foiled again. And then one of those moments of the type promised by Mozart in Schaffer's play, when opera does something only opera can do. The shifting alliances have placed Susanna, Figaro, Marcellina and Bartolo on one side, leaving the Count and his crony, Don Curzio, on the other, and we have an ironically graceful ensemble. There are two more magical musical events in this act. The Countess's second and more demanding aria, and a duet to die for as we prepare for the evening in the garden, where chaos will rule until soothed by the balm of the Countess's forgiving nature. But first, the great aria in which the Countess recalls her earlier theme, Where have my former days of happiness gone? Dove sono? The aria starts quietly and ruminatively. The middle section asks why, in the depths of despair, she is forced to relive moments of former happiness. But the Countess is a much stronger woman than these last two musical extracts suggest, and when she calls out that some day her devotion will be rewarded, we see hitherto unguessed-at reserves of strength, reserves she'll need in Act 4. Our final excerpt from Act 3 is the letter duet. The Countess dictates to her maid Susanna the letter Susanna must send to the errant Count in order to entrap him. Surely no more desperately sad a situation was ever cloaked in such exquisite music. Art lovers will have a picture in mind of Vermeer's lady dictating a letter to her maid, and film buffs may want reminding that this is the music Tim Robbins broadcast over the exercise yard in The Shawshank Redemption, earning himself 2 weeks in solitary confinement. It has been said by high authority that only God and Mozart have ever followed exactly what happens in Act 4 of The Marriage of Figaro, which takes place later that night in the palace garden. The outline is that various assignations are set up, Cherubino with the gardener's daughter Barberina, the Count with Susanna, though her evening cloak and her place will be taken by the Countess. There is double deception to punish Figaro for his mistrust of Susanna, and even a terrible moment when Cherubino nearly upsets the few things that aren't already hopelessly confused. So let's concentrate on some of the extraordinary musical riches. When at one point Figaro suspects that Susanna truly does have an assignation with the Count, he has a furious aria, often performed with the house lights up, in which he tells the men of the audience to open their eyes to the true nature of womankind.
Aprite un po' quegli occhi, uomini incauti e sciocchi, guardate queste femmine, guardate cosa son, guardate cosa son, guardate cosa son.
By the end of the aria, he's saying, well, you know what they're like. The rest we'll leave unsaid. And listen, if you will, to the horns, that ancient symbol of cuckoldry, of the deceived husband, braying their mockery from the orchestra pit.
Già ognuno lo sa, già ognuno lo sa, già ognuno lo sa.
Susanna learns of Figaro's distrust and pays him back by singing a superb aria to her supposed other lover, the meltingly beautiful De Vieni non tardar. Come, hurry, my beloved, and let us enjoy this sweet evening. Naturally, the lovers kiss and make up, and their little reconciliation launches the finale to the act, and to the opera.
Pace, pace, mio dolce tesoro, io conobbi la voce che adoro e che impresso ogni servo nel cor. La voce che adoro, pace, pace, mio dolce tesoro, pace, pace, mio tenero amor, pace, pace, mio tenero amor, pace, pace, mio tenero amor.
But the real triumph of the opera still awaits. It seems everyone is up to some assignation as the Count confronts Figaro and Susanna, who is disguised as the Countess, at the little garden pavilion where all the action is taking place. He believes he will catch the Countess in flagrante.
Gente, gente, allarmi, allarmi, il padrone, gente, gente, aiuto, aiuto, son perduto, cosa venne, il scellerato m'ha tradito, hai amato, per conquista ti ho tenere. Storditi, che ciò siete, in par resistete, uscite, madama, il premio l'avrete di vostra onestà.
The Count is almost proved right, as first Cherubino, then Barbarina, then Marcellina, then Madama, a woman in the Countess's clothes, run on stage from the pavilion to beg forgiveness of the Count, perdono, for their offences. His response is a righteous no, no, no.
Il paggio, mia figlia, mia madre, scoperta era travolta, perfida e quando, perfida e qua.
Perdono, perdono,
No, sperando, perdono, perdono, no, perdono, perdono, no, perdono, no,
in one of the great coups of operatic theatre, the Countess enters the garden behind the Count and says, "May I then ask pardon for them?" A contrite Count, realizing for once that he is totally in the wrong, begs the Countess's forgiveness. Her reply is that she is of a more forgiving nature. E dico di sì, and I say yes. Really, at no other time in Mozart is his great spirit more in evidence than at this perfect moment. It would be well to leave things there, but the conventions of the day demanded a happy and more jubilant ending. The original title of Beaumarchais' play was La Folle Journée, which I might translate idiomatically as One Crazy Day. Indeed, the sense of living through one long, hot, passionate day is inescapable here. Everyone rejoices. But as you listen to their hilarious self-congratulation, do you really believe that the Count's contrition will last, and that all will live as happily as this music suggests? Well, if so, the plot of The Guilty Mother will prove you wrong. And maybe, just maybe, another genius will arise one day to set that final story of the trilogy. In the meantime, corriam tutti a festeggiare. Let's all be off and celebrate.